Okay.
Yeah. Well, see, I don't even know how to do that. I don't know how to do that.
Telling you our Zoom experiences have just been wild. I told
Mm.
you.
Yes, you did tell me. So wild.
Oh, we didn't invite anyone, so no one's gonna flash us today. Okay.
You ready? Let's go.
Okay. All right, so we're live on Facebook.
Hi.
Hi, so here we have everyone. Welcome to our Zoom class. We haven't done one in a long time. I'm right now in Jerusalem. My dad is in New York, and Finn Deerhart is in close to San Francisco, Sierra Mountains.
Yeah, Nevada City, California. Yep.
Yeah, so we're doing a class on religion in the bedroom and how much of an effect your faith should have within your relationship and your sex life. So just to give a little bit of a brief background for Finn, I was listening to a podcast, Shameless Sex, which I think is fantastic. These two really brilliant, funny women. And I just happened to be listening to it and I heard you. And I was really taken with your perspective on relationships and how much you believe in intimacy and sensuality and how much you're aligned with our message. So I immediately wrote to you, and we've been trying to get this going for a very long time. So thank you for joining us, Finn. And if you just want to get in, you have a super interesting story about where you've come from and where you are now and how you got into the field of sex and relationships. So do you want to just go into that and give people a little bit of
sure. Sure. And before I even do that, I just want to say thank you both for inviting me. And I haven't, this is the first time to meet Shmuley. I've had some wonderful chats with you, Chana, and I've enjoyed connecting with you, and just, we always seem to laugh with each other.
It's like we're like you're a trooper, Finn. You've really been, it's been so back and forth with Corona and this and that. So I'm really glad to finally have you on. And you've always been lovely. Every time we talk, you're so lovely. Your story is amazing. So
okay, well, thank you. Yeah, so I'll make this brief because we can go. I was raised in the South, all over the South, in the Church of Christ, a fundamentalist religious church in the Christian faith. And my dad was a minister. He's really outspoken about gay people, and it's a harsh environment that I grew up in. So I was aware that I was gay early on, and I started, hiding and really not knowing how to navigate family life. And that continued on, but I went into the ministry when I was 18 and a half, 19. I went to ministry school myself. I was trying to make sense of my own spiritual life. And I thought, like, okay, well, if I go through this ministry school that I was raised in, it was really hard to let go of some of the stuff that I was taught and to feel okay with myself. But it was like I would say like a last ditch effort for me to really make the Church of Christ work in my own mind. And actually it was like, okay, this is not what I think. I mean, it was really challenging to walk away though, because there was so much teaching as I was a kid about like not trusting yourself, not trusting your own thoughts, not trusting your own, your mind, and it really being suspect of even school and college. There's a lot. So I was like, oh, this feels right that I'm questioning, but I'm also afraid of questioning. And that was just really disempowering for me. But I married a woman and was a minister for a while in a church in.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 23 when I got married.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a minister at a church in Central Texas for about 3 years. And during that time is when I married the woman that I was with. And it became really clear to me at that point that I really wanted to have my own journey and really explore a lot of other religious thought and spirituality. And there just wasn't space for it in that sect of people. So it took a long time for me to come out of the closet. Came out when I was 31. And that was really a painful journey to come to awareness with that, and to also realize that choosing myself, was, I knew that all that time I was like, I would have this thing behind me that was like the gay thing that was coming for me. And I didn't want to have to like let her go. I didn't want to have to let go of that story. I didn't want to have to hurt her. That was really, really challenging, especially I loved her so much. And anyway, I came out of the closet eventually. And that's when I really started this work around sex and intimacy. with gay men, because when I came out at 31, I was already past this phase in myself of wanting to like have this like wild sex spree. It just wasn't emotionally what I wanted, but I also felt like a child because I'm like, I don't even know my sexuality really. And started noticing the effects of shame at that point when I was dating guys, and really feeling like I didn't know how to show up in the bedroom. I couldn't feel present in my body. I felt things that I'd never felt before because I was finally giving myself permission to be more authentic. So that led me into the work that I do with men now, and people in general. I'm open to all genders.
Wow. Well, no, the reason I was so taken with what you were saying on the Shameless Sex podcast was because, I mean, you had gone on your own journey and discovered that you were gay, but a lot of what you were saying, I think, is so applicable to any couple.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I wanted to get you on, especially with my dad, is, you know, he's a rabbi, we're Orthodox, but my dad has been very supportive. I mean, he'll tell you, he'll get into it, but I thought you guys could have a really interesting conversation, because a lot of what any couple goes through can be, like I said, applicable to everyone.
Absolutely.
And through Kosher Sex, me and my dad have really tried to bring a more, I don't know if I would call it feminine, but it's a much more sensual kind of sexuality to the world. And you really touched on that, because a lot of the time we've been, historically and traditionally, we've been understanding sex through a very masculine and more aggressive understanding of it. Yeah, so I wanted to get my dad on.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Yes. Hi.
Well, hi, Finn. It's so good to meet you, albeit via Zoom. Believe me, I'd much rather be surrounded by the redwoods of the Bay Area where you are than the empty concrete structures that surround me right now here in New York, amidst the mass exodus of the coronavirus, or be with my daughter in Israel. Gosh, your story is fascinating. It's an amazing, incredible story. The honesty, the authenticity, your willingness to share the most intimate details of your life.
Thank you.
I think one of the big mistakes we make with religion in general, and religion and homosexuality in particular, is that we take an extreme view, and it's an all or nothing sum game. Meaning, if the Bible says in the book of Leviticus that homosexuality is a sin, so then we therefore say, oh, well, all gay relationships are therefore sinful. We attack them. Fortunately, we haven't seen as much of that over the past 3 or 4 years in American politics. I don't know why, but prior to that, talking points of so many of the political parties were all about demonizing gays and demonizing gay marriage, and elevating the quote sin of homosexuality as the be all and end all of all religion. Your much more nuanced and honest approach, which says that you were married to a woman, you had to deal with a certain truth, and how were you going to break that to her while still being honest and committed in a way that would respect the integrity of the relationship, even if it could not continue. I mean, these are real life issues. This is real religion. Real religion is human. Real religion is compassionate. Real religion is a God who listens amidst God having his law. So, for example, one of the things we're trying to do with Kosher Sex is advocate intimacy. So many religious people come along and say to me, wait a second, intimacy in a gay relationship, but the Bible says that the gay relationship is not kosher. And my response always is, firstly, there's always gradations of kosher. You can have a perfectly holy marriage, a monogamous heterosexual couple who go to church, who go to synagogue, but they are verbally abusive to each other, or they don't have sex anymore, or they even cheat, or he's a porn addict. What makes that kosher? How is that suddenly kosher? We have no nuance when it comes to relationships. So what we're trying to do with Kosher Sex is to say there are certain universal standards that apply to all couples, whether couples who have chosen matrimony, whether couples who have chosen that they don't want to be in an institution, so they've chosen not to be married, whether they're straight, whether they're gay. So, and what are those values? Intimacy, closeness, real emotional nakedness, and not just physical nakedness. Secondly, monogamy, not as monotony, as something that is boring and predictable, and you kind of give up on your sex life. But monogamy is something passionate, electrifying, fiery, and finally, exclusivity. That there's an exclusivity to the relationship. And I counsel gay couples I have a gay brother, as you probably know, and he's an Orthodox Jew who wears a yarmulke. He's a very moral man and a very loving brother. And it really bothers me that religion has found itself incapable of addressing couples who do not meet the absolute perfect biblical norm. Even though as an Orthodox rabbi, I'm not going to change the Bible. It's not mine to change. I'm not going to change God's law, but I am going to be very human about it. So, for example, my daughter Chana is actually pioneering something completely new, which is to look at, as an Orthodox, a modern Orthodox Jewish woman who served in the Israeli army. I mean, clearly she's taken a bit of a excuse the pun, a non-Orthodox path within an Orthodox lifestyle. But she's pioneering something. She's asking me. We do these Zoom discussions, and she'll ask me questions like, "Okay, Tati, so the Bible seems to be against masturbation with onanism and the story of you were a pastor. But let's get real. Do you really think people who are marrying at 25, 30 are not going to masturbate? And is there a difference between female masturbation, male masturbation? And is there a way that all this can be discussed in a manner that transcends just religious prohibition and scripture, but that actually speaks to people's needs?" And I say to her all the time, look, my issue with masturbation is that I actually believe that a sexual dependency on our loving partner or spouse is critical, meaning they should be our principal sexual outlet for erotic thrills, not porn, and not, so there is a rational approach to this, but I respect your humanity very much. I've spoken for way too long, and I'm happy that Chana's moderating this.
I'm loving what you're saying. I'm just like, yeah, totally. Well, it's really cool. I mean, I'm really appreciating hearing all this, and there's so much we could talk for like 3 hours maybe about these ideas. Yeah.
Well, no, I did want to bring something up because I was raised religious. My dad's a rabbi, and Finn, you've been through that whole religious world. But one of the issues I have, and it's not just because they, for so long they bash gays, they bash, all different kinds of relationships. But we talked yesterday, and you mentioned something to me, and on your website, FinnDeerhart.com, you say something about how sex is central to the gay experience and intimacy isn't. Yeah. And you kind of went into why you think that is. And I thought it was so fascinating. You made a point that I've never heard before. And I think that can really be universal when it comes to not just gay relationships. And, that's something that's really highlighted in the Torah and the Bible, but even with relationships about how people view sexuality on their own, for men and women, they experience a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And then that takes a toll on their ability to experience intimacy. So you said something about that. I really wanted you to touch on that, especially about what you said about in gay relationships.
Yeah. Let me circle to that, and I will come back to that piece. I want to really address what Shmuley was saying too. I really appreciate all these, the perspective around, for instance, religion. I think of religion as a way to hone our abilities to really think about, to conceive of, to interact with the divine, and have this a way of being practiced in that field. And I don't think that, there's a lot of blame on religion for a lot of things, and a lot of people that are angry and want to blame religion. And I always have said, I did go through an angry phase after I left the church. I had a lot of anger with my dad and with everything, the church. And now it's like, after studying people, being with people and work in this field that I'm in, it's like, I think of it as like, people will hide behind whatever they hide behind. So if you hide behind a religious idea, then that's what you're doing. If you hide behind your job, that's what you're doing. If you hide behind a sexual identity, people are the thing. Like religion is a framework and an asset to us to really help us, like I said, hone skill. So I don't see that religion and sexuality have to be apart at all. And to your point too, Shmuley, about masturbation, I really love what you were sharing, and I think there's a lot around that. I think people in general, it's like people don't really, I even use the word self-pleasure, right? Like this idea of like being in contact with one's eroticism. And there's so many really cool ways that couples can utilize even like pleasuring themselves as a way to like throttle their own monogamous relationship. Like you maybe like building up sexual energy. I teach people to even use a mirror, to like be with them, like eye gaze with themselves, like pleasure themselves, be honest about the feelings that they're having, work up some arousal, and then even take that back to their partner. and not use it as a way to like escape. Maybe sometimes, maybe a couple's in the middle of like a crisis, and so they're like diverting their sexual energy elsewhere instead of like really being honest with each other about resentments that they're feeling or challenges that they're having and opening up emotionally. And so there's a lot around just couples dynamics that brings in sexual issues, and people want to go look at sex first as the issue, and I always like to take it back to like the emotional self, what's going on for the person individually. And I think that we've been conditioned around masturbation in a certain kind of way, that it's like this like sneaky thing that you do to quote unquote get off, and like it's like a Heidi kind of element versus like like it's like massaging your body, like not even focusing on genitals necessarily, but like really being in touch with your emotions in your body, and then like having an openness and like receptivity to yourself, and then sharing that with your partner. So I'm in favor of that. Like if couples want to be in a monogamous relationship, I do think it can be so hot and so exciting. And people have this idea that it's like, oh, but then I'm kind of stuck. And I'm like, well, you're only stuck in as much as you're stuck in your own mindset around things. So that's my perspective there. And as it relates to gay men, and your question, Chana, too, about intimacy, like you were asking, like this sex versus intimacy. And I tell guys all the time, like in the gay culture, and I am speaking in generalization, but like in the gay culture, it's like, you don't even need to like know people's names. You just have sex first, and that's a way of entry into some sort of like relating process with somebody. And often guys will hook up, and that's how they meet someone, and then they want to turn it into a relationship, and sometimes they're successful with that, and a lot of times they're not, and they feel kind of stumped. And I'm telling people, even if you don't know somebody and you're just having like an anonymous encounter, that doesn't mean that it's not like one of the most intimate experiences of your own self that you can have. I mean, like this is like from childhood, it's like touching your inner child, like everything that we've acquired around sex and intimacy and like prohibition and fear and all that stuff's coming up in the way that we even make choices in the world sexually anyway. It like informs the choices that we make. So I think, with gay men, my opinion is that often there's like this broken relationship around even worthiness, and that was like one of the original wounds that they encountered. I encountered, like hide this, tuck it away. You can never be this. And so then it kind of governs their psyche for a long time and becomes how they are trying to like rectify that imbalance inside and like chasing it. But they're getting lost, I think, my opinion, they're kind of getting lost on the surface of like chasing after experiences instead of really integrating and saying like, what am I really looking for? Like, what is this desire really leading me towards? Is it just the acquisition of objects or is it something more? What were you gonna say?
So your point that if I'm quoting Chana, who's quoting you correctly, that gay culture can be about sex rather than intimacy. Is that the quote?
Well, that's the perception, that it's a dichotomy versus it being all the same.
So let's go back a couple of decades when society first started speaking about homosexuality much more openly, which was something important to me because I had a gay brother, meaning I have a gay brother. What I mean by that, using the past tense, is that my brother found it very difficult to come out in Orthodox Jewish life. It was extremely challenging. And I remember people sitting at our Sabbath table who did not know he was gay. He didn't hide it, but he wasn't yet fully open about it. And I remember people making comments like, I mean, Chana might remember this as well, maybe she's too young, that gays are dogs, that they're animals, that they're, these were religious people who would be compassionate in every other area of their life, but who were monstrously brutal on this subject. And they didn't even realize that, there's a person sitting right next to you who you are demonizing. So when people first started speaking about homosexuality, one of the arguments always was, and especially, let's say the mid 80s, with the rise of AIDS, was that, these gay men they're only, it's like a double male libido in one guy. Men, as it is, are very sexual and physical. And now if you're gay, it's two gay men, they're only focused on each other's bodies. That's why gay men have such incredible bodies, and it's much more sexual than intimate. I actually think that all proved to be a lie. I mean, it was true for many men in the same way that promiscuity was true for many heterosexual men and women. I actually see gay men who really want intimacy. They want to be in relationships. They want to have children, which is remarkable to me. Chana and I know someone who's very high up in government, very busy, but he took the years with his partner to get a surrogate, 2 children, and he told me his life would be incomplete without kids, and his life was pretty darn complete. He's a high-ranking government official. So I'm seeing this gradual. I don't think it's actually a movement towards intimacy. I think it was always there. I think for either political reasons, there were many people who had an agenda in kind of promoting the gay lifestyle as one that was not only immoral based on the book of Leviticus, but immoral based on promiscuity, immoral based on being non-monogamous, people using each other, and no doubt there was some of that. And during the AIDS pandemic, now we have a totally different pandemic. No doubt there were people who engaged in that, in risky and unhealthy behavior. But I have to say, heterosexuals have done a pretty darn good job at that, at some of that behavior as well. So I did see it as a little bit agenda driven. Let me just make this one last point, Chana. Like I always say, look, I'm an Orthodox rabbi and I don't change the Bible. So painful as it sounds, either to my brother or all my gay friends who are both male and female, of which I have many, as Chana will tell you, who are regulars at our Shabbat table. And I can't change the Bible and say that the book of Leviticus doesn't say that this is behavior that seems to be in contravention of the divine will. But you know what? So is lighting a match on the Sabbath. So is eating a cheeseburger. So is eating lobster or shellfish. None of these actions are considered immoral. But the demonization of gay relationships and saying they can't be intimate, and saying they can't be monogamous, or they can't be passionately sexual within monogamy, or that they can't be about a family and children, is terrible. I should add one little interesting story. When I was a syndicated radio host a bunch of years ago, so there was a story, big story at the time, I think it was Kansas. There was a gay couple who had raised a foster child, if I remember the facts correctly, and they were religious. They went to church. They were Catholic. Every Sunday they went to church. And I think that the priest condemned them, like from the pulpit or something, and said that they should be allowed to raise his child. And I found them. I did an interview with them, and I said to them, I just can't believe this. The priest doesn't want to raise them. It's not as if someone came forward and said, "Hey, we'll feed them and do their homework and dress them and clothe them and compliment them." And it's
special needs or something. He had special needs.
No, but that kind of stuff disgusts. Oh, that's right, special needs child. That's right.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff just disgusts me. So the demonization of homosexuality has meant, especially in some religious circles, has meant that we can't have a discussion about the kosher aspects of it, like intimacy, and so then only the misconceptions remain. That is, gay men are only interested in sex, they're not interested in intimacy, they're only interested in the body, it's all physical, it's not emotional, it's not about being attracted to the mind, to the heart, to the spirit, it's all about, going to the gym and those are stereotypes that I think are very harmful.
They are, and they're also, I think, testimony to a fracturing that happens. And I think, to me, there's like this overall misunderstanding of like what is. I mean, I think what Chana was wanting me to bring up actually, and now I'm recalling. Yeah. I'm remembering now. It's like that there's eroticism and then there's sex, and sex is like a behavioral thing. It's behavioral. It's function of body parts. It's but eroticism is like life force. It's in touch with the erotic, and which is part of the divine. And I don't really, is like gay men pursuing sex. I don't want to say, okay, don't. I think that there's a level of permission first that has to be established with people where they think, okay, I'm allowed to have desire, but then, like I was saying to you, Chana, it's like, well, what's beyond that? Like, is it the experience of sex that you're wanting, or is it something different? Is it a bigger picture? Like, and I think that truly is what we want, and we're trying to fulfill it through this, rope that keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming as, slack. And people do that in all kinds of ways with like power and money and sex, or cake or whatever, whatever it is that they're just like, give me more and more and more to feel this something inside. And I think of like the erotic in that way. Like I'm looking outside my window right now. It's like this Japanese maple and like the trees all around. And like, there's not this dilemma happening about, is this out of alignment with God or not? It is just like, it's the permeating, energy of the universe. And I think of sex in that way. But I think to have that kind of mindset about sex, we have to heal the pain that we have around it. So we're carrying around this.
You touched on something also about how, and I don't know, I've discussed this with my dad about whether this is just that men and women are just fundamentally different when it comes to sex, and women are going to be more interested in intimacy, and men are always going to be more about the physical, because Judaism doesn't really believe that, and I think that's a lot of what society has made men believe. So I think that's why I really affiliate with what you're saying. But you also touched on something about how for a lot of people who are homosexual or trans or whatever they're going through, they feel a little bit of rejection on the part of religion, and so that's why it's harder to bring spirituality into your relationship when you feel so much pain associated with it.
Totally. And fear, right? It's like, I like that this attitude inside around like the split between sex and spirit. I look at it like it's not so much the actions that we're doing as much as it's how we're imagining what it is that we're doing. So if you think that, I can't like be seen in all this pain and fear that I have inside around who I am and a sense of worthiness and like, essentially blocks to love and naturally like the accumulation of pain that we've, had in society. But if I'm trying to keep that tucked over here and not be seen and still have sexual experiences, it leaves me in a situation where I can't really have intimate quote unquote sex because I'm trying to like hide all this stuff that I'm really feeling.
Yeah.
And like sex itself brings all that to the surface. And so it's like, oh no, here it is. And I'm feeling really vulnerable. I'm feeling seen. I don't know how to like really be in that and allow that in, as I think people encounter that a lot, that feeling of split. So that leaves people, chasing sex out here and then having like sweetness over here in a relationship.
Right. But you guys can continue.
Don't leave. She left. But yeah, and in the relationship piece, it's interesting. I've worked with a wide spectrum of men, and some of which are not religious, and I feel like on that side of things, it's hard to get them to be open sometimes to a sense of mystery and of wanting to be in self-inquiry about themselves, because they're like, no, I am never going back to feeling this sense of self-rejection. And then on the other side with like religious people, it's like they're like really tuned into this like love of mystery and wanting to be in that and wanting to like devote their lives to something, but then they also struggle to bring in some of their animal desires and then they don't know how to like make space for that in the relationship, because in general there's like this spectrum of like perception that it's like dirty over here, holy over here. And I've just been saying it's all holy. It's just like, how do we let ourselves really like feel that spectrum and integrate all that part of ourselves? So I think the relationships also bear that kind of split a lot, with couples not knowing how to really bring in their desire, or if they're just out, like I said, like a lot of gay men will just choose a route to just like not really connect with each other emotionally fully, or not really share their inner worlds, and maybe just choose an open relationship as a way to try to navigate that split inside. It's not a commentary on all open relationship, but
yeah, I don't even think that's specific just to the gay community. I think that's the hookup culture. A lot of, I think men specifically deal with that a lot, and women are getting into that too, because we're hearing from society about what sex is supposed to be like, and when it becomes something painful, you just kind of you erase that intimate side of it.
Yeah, and women are really, it's like this idea that women are this way and men are this way. I think there's some threads of like biological stuff around that, but there's also like a massive amount of socialization that goes into that. And men haven't been taught about how to communicate about their feelings, about how to be vulnerable, even like having this like sense of receptivity to like, maybe y'all could comment on this, about to the divine, there's a receptivity there and surrender. And men are like really pushed from little boys onward to like not feel their feelings, not cry, man up, quote unquote. It's a performance act right from the get-go. And on the playground, you're like out there trying to make sure you don't get beat up, and like, clicking together and like forming these little cliques of power. And so then when they come into adolescence and adulthood, they're utilizing sex as a way to get a whole host of needs met for surrender, for vulnerability, for tenderness, and stuff that they don't let themselves feel fully. And we actually hold a lot of that for the culture, for everybody.
No, there's definitely so much culturalization, and there is also sexual malleability, even amidst a gender divide. But your key point about the distinguish between sex and intimacy, I think, is the very essence. Chana wanted to call this talk about to what extent religion should be involved in the bedroom and religion and sex. I think it's the key issue of how religion addresses sex. And here it's a positive thing. I'm not now looking at, so often sex is seen through a religious lens as masturbation is going to make you go blind and you're going to burn in hell, and homosexuality is a terrible sin, and adultery is in the 10 Commandments. I get that. I get all the sexual prohibitions. The beauty is never seen, though, because I think the key teaching of religion, it's universal teaching that applies to atheists and agnostics, people with no faith, is this idea that there is no word for sex in the entire Bible. The word is knowledge. Sex is supposed to be intimacy, and it's what people most want. I know people think they want sex, even what Erica Jong would call the zipless, F blank CK. They want it to be zipless. They don't want emotional attachment. And we mentioned before that certainly gay culture was often portrayed that way in previous decades, less so now. But I don't think that's what people want, men or women, straight or gay. I think people want intimacy. I think they want a certain oneness with another human being. I think they actually want to be known fully by another human being. I think God wants to be known, which is why we spend our lives trying to know him, even though he's unknowable. But the thing is, vulnerability is the most challenging of all human endeavors, to take our guard down and invite attack, invite pain, invite rejection. I think the vast majority of us go through life very lonely, even if we are in happy marriages. How could it be that you're in a happy marriage and you're lonely? Because the deepest part of yourself is still never shared. Even you're not aware of your deepest part of yourself, let alone your spouse. Rare is the relationship, rare is the man or woman who has a deep sense of self-knowledge and actually shares that self-knowledge with another. It takes years of practice. I always say to my wife, it's for a man, it's like here I am wearing a shirt. It's like wearing a shirt inside out. It's showing all the seams, turning yourself inside out. Now, what you just said before, Finn, about men, not wanting to be beaten up on the monkey bars or being really tough in sports. What about the fact that they think once they start dating, forget being around other guys who are going to call them sissy men unless they're really tough. What about the fact that they also think that women don't want vulnerable men, that women want strong sexual men who look
that's
at
that's an issue.
It is an issue because what Finn is saying is happening on the playground. It's reinforced in relationships. So I see a whole generation of men who in terms of relationships are utterly lost and very, very lonely. I think this accounts, although I don't want to be simplistic, I think it accounts for male alcoholism, male porn addiction, male Netflix addiction, all the other addictions. And everything is just an attempt to pull us away from ourselves so that we never know ourselves, we never really express ourselves, we never really share ourselves. And it ain't working. It's not working.
No.
Right now, sorry to go on, I'll just make this final point.
I love it. Go on.
I think we're living in a deeply, deeply dysfunctional country right now. And I want to mention, I love America. On the 4th of July, this past Saturday, it turned out on our Shabbat, so we could only do things 4th of July once the Sabbath went out. Pretty late here in New York, about 9:30. But I took my kids on scooters, and we were singing Lee Greenwood, Proud to be an American. And I really did think about all the men who died, who gave me the right to be free. Last year, I took my son, David Chaim, to the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings and the Normandy cemetery where 10,000 American soldiers are buried. I thought of that, that trip as I sang that song on the 4th. I love this country. But we live in a deeply dysfunctional country right now. And I don't just mean political dysfunction. I don't mean, is it Trump? Is it Biden? Is it the conservatives? I'm talking about relationship-wise, we're dysfunctional. Our addiction to, Netflix, their stock is, or even Amazon. The
How
way
are
we've
people
dealt with the
sick of
corona.
Netflix? There's nothing else to watch. It's like,
Okay, Chana, but there's books to read, there's conversations to be
Yeah.
had, there's walks to be had, and I'll tell you something
not,
else.
how are people not sick of Netflix?
E- but e-
I
but
think
even
I've-
but even but even the success of Amazon speaks volumes.
Uh-huh.
I would venture to say that through this pandemic, if I had to guess, and I could maybe even speak for myself, first we weren't buying anything because we didn't know if we had any money left whatsoever. And then when things got back a little, the world's not going to completely end and the stock market's not going to completely disappear. Maybe we'll have a couple of bucks. When you start buying stuff, I would venture to say that 50% or more of all the stuff that people have bought during the pandemic, these boxes that arrive at your house because you don't go to malls and all that, are just junk that they're not going to need 3 days later. It's a momentary high. It's a fix.
Yeah.
Because we need to buy stuff to make ourselves happy. We need to escape and Netflix to make ourselves happy. Porn has become a huge escape. All this dysfunctionality for me bespeaks a very lonely society who doesn't know how to connect. So your work is extremely important. I'm so happy that Chana has brought us together to discuss this. And I'm listening to you very intently. And it's rare for me to hear someone who was raised religious, was religious, and felt, oh my God, was I betraying my religion when I left it? And what was my father going to think? And who am I letting down? But rare is the man who's prepared to say all this and to express it. But that self-knowledge is how we assuage loneliness, even for ourselves.
Totally. I agree. Thank you for that. And I think of there's like this invisible glass wall in between a lot of couples, like you mentioned, like even in a partnership where you're lonely and not known, because it's like, for one, like the deepest parts of us, like you said, are unknown and drive a lot of our behavior. But there's like this wall that we keep to people. And I like this analogy that, like, with a wall up, we get the safety that provides us in our thoughts, of like not being known, but we also get the numbness and the isolation that comes along with that. And then when we take the wall down, we have the fear and the discomfort of that, but we also gain so much by being seen. And it's really scary. And I do agree with you that, those sexual divides are reinforced in relationship. Like women are socialized in the same environments that men are. So even though they might on one hand feel like, oh, I hate it when guys are like that, then they also maybe desire it in their sexual arousal. Why is that? I think that the erotic energy is like coursing through us and leading us. If we tune into it mindfully, it like leads us towards like these broken relationships to power that need to be healed. Esther Perel is one of my favorite thinkers in relationships. There's this quote that she says that like, we like between the sheets what we protest in the streets, and how women are like about men,
What's the quote again?
It's and I wish this was my quote, but we like between the sheets what we protest in the streets, meaning that these divisions are there. And I think of it from like a spiritual perspective and from an anthropological kind of view, because that's not what the therapy dialogue is all about. She's highlighting what is, but I'm thinking like, yeah, of course that's true, because this arousal and the erotic is like really trying to lead us towards putting our bodies and our hearts and our souls back together again. And so you might be drawn to this kind of man again and again and again as a woman, and feeling really hurt by that, until you go, that's like a false sense of power that I'm really handing away to this person, and that's really my power. And it's kind of like a unifying thing. But I think there isn't a practiced way about being in sex like that in our culture. It's just like thought about as consumption and as an experience in isolation, without the connective tissue of a spiritual framework and intimacy. And so people don't really put that together. They're just kind of like, I don't know, I keep being drawn to the same kind of guy or the same kind of woman, or like, yeah, what about that? Like, where is that leading you? And so, I mean, I think of it in like a tantric way. It's like this following the flame of desire, with the practice awareness of what happens when you do that, and where does that take you to it's called the real, like the real inside, and what that means about where I have left off with healing work around my relationship to my power and to the divine, or to my family, or to whatever, and I think that in that sense, sex loses its like addictive type mindset whenever we integrate it back into a sense of wholeness in ourselves. Because we might see like, oh, it isn't really sex that I'm actually after today as a function. It's more the experience of being known. Or maybe it is sex, but maybe it's also like being known or being seen or being like held or being able to share like what's on my mind and heart, or, you know, all kinds of things that are not like a genital focused experience, maybe, you know?
Yeah, very true. Well, I do want to touch on one last point, and I
Sure.
want you and my dad to both answer it, because one of the things when I opened my kosher sex shop really briefly in New York, people would always walk in and they're like, "What's this about? And what is kosher sex?" And the one thing I would always say, which is what my dad has really tried to get out there, is that as opposed to, you know, Judeo-Christian values have kind of really affected society and how we live.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say Christian more than Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
because Christianity has kind of taught us that lust is something that's purely evil, and celibacy is the way to live. If you want to live a spiritual life, you have to be celibate. And in Judaism, it's actually the exact opposite. The high priest actually had to be married in order to perform certain duties that he had to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you say something about, you say that when you do counseling, you explore the love and lust split,
Mm-hmm.
and why sex and relationships often feel at odds with each other. So in the shop, I would always say kosher sex really believes that lust is almost more important than love in a relationship. Love is obviously key, but in your relationship, to keep it together, lust is more important. And I just want you guys to both touch on why is it that lust and love, they just seem like they can't live together. And like, how do people get around that?
Well, I'll touch on this first, and then I'd love to hear Finn's perspective, and then I will cease boring my daughter with my views on human relationships and let her teach me.
True.
Lust and love are obviously directly contradictory. Think about it. Let's just go through this logically. You know, lust is usually for something new and novel. You know, no one sits outside a movie theater in a sleeping bag for 3 weeks to see a movie that's been playing for a year. They sit outside that movie theater when a new Star Wars picture is coming out or something like that. I mean, it's insane, but they do that. They lust for the novel, the exciting, that sense of adventure. The same thing is true with bodies. People, you know, lust after like a new body, a new sexual experience. That's the first thing, you know, the novelty. Secondly, lust is all about distance. You lust after something you can't have. You know, it's why Plato famously argued for platonic relationships, because once you have consummation of the relationship, you can't lust after it anymore. So lust is actually opposed by regular interaction and friendship and continuity and predictability. And third, lust is all about the objectification. It's about looking at something specifically as an object, as something physical specifically, with specific dimensions, specific curves, specific sizes, because it's all about possession. Lust is, I have to have this, I have to have it. So it's not about depth, it's all about the externalities. Now, love is the opposite. Love is magnified specifically through sharing. The longer you're with someone, the more you love them, as all couples will tell you. Even as you lust for them less, very often you love them more, because it's not about novelty. It's the exact opposite. It's about familiarity. The second thing is that love is actually increased through proximity. It's hard to stay in touch with someone that you don't see. You know, absence makes lust grow fonder, but it does not make the heart go fonder. That's not true. Familiarity and shared experience is what makes the heart grow fonder. Out of sight, out of mind. That's a much more true expression. And finally, love is about something more deeper than just the external dimensions. So the two are contradictory, and yet they're both so necessary. They will never live side by side, in my opinion, simultaneously and easily. They will live side by side concurrently. In the Jewish religion and in the Jewish marriage, we kind of accept this. In the kosher sex marriage, couples kind of have 2 weeks of greater love, familiarity, friendship, communication, sharing, massaging, touching, and they really don't have sex for 2 weeks. They go through this biblical routine, and then 2 weeks is more about lust. So 2 weeks are more of a watery love, you know, calmer, no ripples, no waves, and 2 weeks of a much more fiery love. But I think we make a mistake when we try to force love and love to coexist. Let me just give you one example finally. Take parenting. Now, I'm a father of 9 children, thank God, but I'm married, thank God, with 32 years. There are times when I relate to my wife specifically as a woman and as my wife. And then there are times when I relate to her specifically as the mother of my children. And we also sometimes have to know when to embrace each of those roles. Sometimes my wife and I need to decide, we're going to go away for the weekend without the kids, because the loving part of our relationship, which is more integrated into family, which is more about the nurturing aspects of being parents, that needs to be put by the side for the moment while we focus more on being a couple. I think that's appropriate. Now, you do your best to have them live simultaneously, and you do your best to have them, but there's nothing wrong with also embracing that sometimes they're going to be concurrent. What there is something wrong with is believing that one is important and the other is not, that lust sucks and that love is what really matters. I totally disagree with that. In many ways, I even think that lust is more important, or I don't mean the cheap kind of lust that you see in porn, but the much deeper kind of lust that you see of the masculine and feminine energy that kind of gravitate toward one another, which I think is true of both straight and gay relationships. I think each and every one of us, even as individuals, have a more masculine, more feminine, a more receptive, a more assertive side. So that's how I see that interplay.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing. I so agree with you too about this idea around they're like paradoxical, right? That like love and lust, and I think that they exist in our culture as a split because people don't really fully know how to integrate. And what you described is a really beautiful maneuver, I think, to integrate different roles that you're playing in the relationship, and like making time for us to connect as lovers, and then making time to connect as family, and all these different parts of ourselves. And I mean, when we get into a relationship, we kind of fall into a certain organization of different parts of ourselves that come forward the most. And then a lot of us, our other more pieces might live over here on the side. And a lot of people struggle, like, how do I integrate all that? And I don't think that it has to be okay, goodbye to all this, or like, I'll tuck that into the shadows. And a lot of people experience this tension, and this like, well, lust lives out there and love lives in here. And I personally believe that it's an act of integrating and just learning skills, like when people meet, often like in a sex first kind of way, for instance, maybe, they think that lust is like, it's this thing that just happens to us, or like chemistry, people describe sexual chemistry as if it's just like arbitrary circumstances. And I'm saying, no, those are moments in which you feel really able to let down your guard. You're able to feel really seen and honest, and you express yourself with like full like vigor. And then you feel really full of lust and arousal, right? So I don't even use the word lust, it's take arousal. You're allowing this like flowing energy to come in. And then when that's happening, maybe it's a little harder to be seen intimately, or maybe you meet your partner in a way where you're really intimate first. Like for my current partner, I met him and I said, I don't want to have sex first, because I'd already been through a lot of, having sex with guys. And I was like, I want to try something different. And for me, we just became really close emotionally, and had like a really, really beautiful heart connection. And then I noticed, oh, wow, it's really in these ways that I've been out here hooking up in the past. I felt like this sexual, like, animal. I don't even know how to integrate that in now, because I'm so risky. Like, oh no, what if he like, so I think for people, and it took work to like break down those fears and just to like let myself be seen. And I think that can happen with couples if they're committed to work with each other, to be like, okay, here's this range of stuff that I'm like this here. Like, I love you. So like the mother, I'm the wife, I'm the woman who wants sex, I'm all these different pieces. And like, these ones right here, these roles, I feel really comfortable expressing with you without fear. And these over here are kind of scary. So let's make some safe space to work on that together, and just work at the skills that would allow us to feel full arousal. And that's what I think happens when couples just like, they think they want novelty, but I think what they're really wanting often is like a new experience of themselves, not so much a new object. It's like, I feel stuck in myself and I don't know how to like, and so the real work for me is to break that down and to like really find the novelty in me, and look at where I'm not showing up fully, where I'm not letting myself express, and not blame my partner for that. It's not his fault for being the same guy. It's like, I have to like get outside of that comfort zone and express. And so then I find that for me, the love lust split has like started to collapse significantly, and I'm able to express myself a lot more, in a raw way with him than when I first got into the relationship, and so that's like, that's not the same for everybody. It's just kind of a seesaw. And I do think of them as parallel processes, like you said.
Yeah. Wait, and last thing, we're going on on like an hour.
Okay.
What would you say is the number one thing that you deal with when you're doing couples counseling? What do you think is the one thing that's stopping people from connecting and having a good relationship?
Well, I could say that with one
Yeah.
sentence, and that'll be my final contribution. Because Finn, I've so enjoyed listening to you, and I have tremendous respect for sensitive people in general, but sensitive men in particular.
Yeah, right. They're rare.
An all too rare breed.
Mm.
God, what's wrong with us men that we find it so difficult to talk about our emotions? I can answer in one sentence, Chana. What do I most deal with? Loss of attraction. And I think that spills over into almost every other area. Loss of attraction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I second that. And I think that loss of attraction is a function of something bigger inside the person, which is like a loss of connection to self.
You think it comes from something from within?
Absolutely. Yeah, we lose connection with ourselves. We get really kind of enmeshed in a dynamic that like is not really, we don't have a sense of sovereignty anymore that we feel, or our own sense of boundaries, like this is where you stop and this is where I start. And so then people stop listening to each other. They're not even really connected to their own sense of needs and boundaries. And so they project all that onto their partner and they can't even really hear. And of course, once that's going on, attraction is hard because attraction pulls you closer, and attraction, I think, demands that you like show yourself. And if you're wanting to guard yourself and keep walls up, you've got a canceling frequency. Rather just push the person away. It's like, I'll just push this person away and then I will not deal with the problem. But then it just the problem never goes away, and people recreate it in every relationship they get in.
Yeah, it's amazing how much of relationships and sex is connected with healing yourself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're only just starting to talk about that, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, but look at, given the societal dysfunction, and all we talk about is how much we hate each other, and increasing racial injustice that has to be addressed, but also just societal harmony that has to be addressed, and the dysfunctional political discourse. What I'm trying to say is all conversations today are just people hating each other's guts, demonizing each other. We don't know how to talk to each other anymore. And someone's got to fix this, and it's not going to come from politicians. Because the essence of politics is kind of conflict, and that's okay. I don't want to live in China with only one state. I don't want to live in Putin's Russia that stifles dissent. But I do think that relationship counselors, religious figures, social commentators who have a brain and who have a heart need to be more vocal and have like decent conversations. I mean, we could have done this conversation very differently, Finn. I could have cursed you out. You could have said, "Oh, Shmuley, I can't stand you. What an odious personality you have." And by the way, and we probably would. You'll get more views, and maybe it'll even make some news. You know, Finn Deerhart cursed out Rabbi Shmuley on his own Facebook page. but you know, aren't we?
We're on something right now, Finn.
Right.
But aren't we all like past that stuff already? It's gotten so boring. It's like, I mean, talk about unhealthy addictions. Anyway, I thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. But I thank you immensely, and most of all, to be honest, I'd like to thank Chana for bringing us together, and for being she's such a courageous voice. I'm so proud of my daughter. She's such a courageous voice in discussing. And it's not easy. She takes a lot of flack and she gets a lot of criticism, but she handles it. And I'm very proud of her.
Yeah. Well, I took all your ideas, so. But Finn, thank you so much. And hopefully we can do this again in a better setting and when all of this calms down. But this was really, always love. The first time I heard you, every time I talk to you, it's really enlightening and inspiring. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, God bless you and every good thing.
Yeah, you too. And I really appreciate the coming together. Like, I value that so much, like coming together and not finding like, well, how can we find lines of separation? Like, how can we find a vibe to connect on? And I do feel that. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, Chana may have mentioned to you, I lost my father about 5 or 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it really is, he was 87, thank God. So, but at any age, it's terrible. And it's really a life-altering event because so many things that you thought were important before, and they change a little bit. but especially the futility of constant strife and argument. So futile. Okay, anyway, God bless you and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
y'all.
God
Finn.
bless.
Yeah, bye-bye.